So the Sunday Express today, 15th of November, 2020, is around a two-page spread, hoping or calling for the return of bouncing Boris, as if Boris was bouncing before. Given the contents of the coverage, Boris Johnson's the most persistent, evidentially, theme that has accompanied his coverage or appearance in the public domain has been that he has been a liar, a deceiver, and unfit for purpose. So, I mean, where did they get this bouncing Boris? This thing they're running, call for the return of bouncing Boris. I mean, where did the bounce come from? Where did it exist? And this writer is described as a political commentator, Patrick O'Flynn, who calls himself a Brexiteer. Claims that the end of this month marks the 10th anniversary of the Express newspaper titles launching their campaign to get Britain out of the EU. A final deal that lets us declare the job a good one would be much appreciated, but for the Prime Minister to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory would prove a catastrophic political mistake. Now, this guy, Patrick O'Flynn, is, of course, typically for a self-confessed Brexiteer, is in denial of the general goings-on in the world. And this man, he says that he's actually not a fan of Nigel Farage. And we shall be talking about the campaign to get rid of the corrupt post of elected mayor in a minute. Now, the Express newspaper about Boris Johnson, about his fiancée, and the other topics are all full of contradictions and inaccuracies and falsehoods. And there is no exception. Everything the Express says is completely fabricated. And it says that Zoos are facing extinction because of red tape. Let's see if it is making an exception and telling anything like the truth about the threat to the zoos, it says. Zoos, aquariums, and safari parks face permanent closure because red tape is stopping access to emergency funds. Campaigners say out of more than 300 operations in England, it is understood just 5 have won access to the government's 100 million Zoo Animals Fund to help the business during lockdown. Zoos must be down to the last 12 weeks of reserves to secure cash from this scheme. But campaigners say that many zoos would rehome their creatures before that point because it can take months and even years to find suitable places. Now, Rosendale, who is a Tory MP, chairs the all-party group for zoos and aquariums, said, "We are in an astonishing place where 100 million support fund has been established, and yet zoos that need help cannot access this money. This fund is inadequate and flawed. Government has been told this for months. The problem was always the red tape around the fund, including the absurd requirement that zoos exhaust their reserves before they can receive funding." The Romford MP said it was frankly absurd that zoos, aquariums, and safari parks have not received the same level of all full-throated support as museums, heritage, and arts sector, despite caring for living, breathing animals, many of which are the last of their kind. And this is a story that we shall be following up, but not in this edition necessarily, but we shall be following up in due course. Now, let's see what's happening on the other side. So let's see what is going on with the rest of the edition. This is part 2, and we said that we'd be discussing at length the issue of getting rid of the corrupt post of elected mayor. Now, of course, it is relevant to Tower Hamlets, London East 1, or East End of London, and the Khoodeelaar campaign, which is broadcasting this one, is part of the movement that has been opposed to the further kind of disappearance of whatever fragile state of accountability existed in local councils and in the case of Greater London. To the people of Greater London, when the Greater London Council was in existence, and there was a kind of 15 years or so gap between the scrapping of the Greater London Council by Margaret Thatcher in the mid-1980s to the creation of the London mayor at the expense of the people of London, or democracy in London, by Tony Blair. Now, Tony Blair was totally ill-advised to invent this elected mayor post in London, and also give the opportunity to local kind of communities, the local boroughs, to imitate and foist this anti-democratic obstruction and the corrupting post of mayor. So as at this time, in London alone, there are 4 boroughs. But what our campaign has actually repeatedly pointed out, and it is absolutely factually fact-checked and undeniable, is that the four elected mayor kind of lumbered London boroughs are all in East London. Three of them in East London, and one is in South London, over the other side of the River Thames, Lewisham. Now, all the boroughs have got experience over the years since the imposition of this mayor post. And there are enough people with enough evidence in all these boroughs to actually substantiate and make a substantial representation justifiably justifying the abolition of this corrupt and corrupting post. And yet in Croydon, which is further to the south, the southwest of Lewisham, there is a kind of call or the move to impose an elected mayor in Croydon. I mean, that could be the worst possible move that the people of Croydon had been kind of faced with, because the campaigners claim that the mayor post would have avoided the corruption and the abuse of money and the abuse of resources by the ordinarily constituted kind of structure of Croydon Council, which is led by a leader. And the current state of finance in Croydon is that it is in debt. The figure of debt by Croydon Council, as publicly accessed, is over 1.5 billion. And there is no way that anyone who knows about Tower Hamlets or Newham or Hackney could say that having a mayor would have kind of prevented the abuse of funds. We're talking about Tower Hamlets, so we are not talking about Newham or Hackney in this instance, but only by extrapolation. We shall discuss both Hackney and Newham and Lewisham individually at length in due course. But this one, we are starting this one because this one is about Tower Hamlets, because the plug that has been going around is that John Biggs, who is described in The Guardian in April 2018 as the diminutive John Biggs, is making dishonest kind of gestures in order to save his position as a careerist in post. He supports the corrupt mayor system. Now, anyone who is new to this program and new to this campaign should be told this. John Biggs is an immigrant, if you like, an internal immigrant from another part of the country to Tower Hamlets. And he has made a series of careers, electorally abusing the community in Tower Hamlets, and he has become the symbol. He has been kind of very craftily lying about the fact that there is a significant, in the population in Tower Hamlets, significant part of the population is Bangladeshi or Asian or, not indigenous white. And he has sold himself at the door of the indigenous voter, if you like, as the white hope. So Biggs is a white supremacist, but he dare not say that. But he has been. For example, in September 2013, on the BBC London slot, of a political kind of Sunday kind of slot. Biggs lied and said that the Bangladeshis were getting kind of favorable treatment in terms of the resources of the Armed Council being allocated. That never was the case, and I shall come to exposing Biggs's racistly motivated lie in September 2013. One of the racists who kind of has covered as a so-called journalist, he himself invents his stature. The word he uses has been stature. And he has peddled John Biggs, the racist. And his name is Ted Jury. Ted Jury posted a number of bitter kind of attacks on anyone who condemned John Biggs as racism. And the problem with the judiciary or the members of the licensed law trade, of which Richard Morey is one. Morey was the kind of election commissioner looking at the election petition submitted against Lutfur Rahman in 2014. Now, Biggs is not a member of the local community in the sense of having any ordinary experience of belonging to the community and experiencing the various daily denials of rights, amenities, facilities that ordinary people in Tower Hamlets face every single day. Thousands of people in Tower Hamlets have been left in various stages and various states, various degrees of deprivation of basic amenities and service and facilities. And the other thing is that Biggs always refers to the Bangladeshis, even when he is addressing people who are mostly born in Tower Hamlets and born in the UK, as if they are recent arrivals and as if they lack in some way the basic kind of abilities that he suggests, and he kind of conveys this suggestion the ordinary indigenous white people have. So he uses patronizing language, and the language he uses phrases that suggest that he is judging the Bangladeshis and their achievement against some kind of measure that he created himself. Now, Biggs is a typical racist, ignorant of the history of the kind of phenomenon of migration. And before that, he's ignorant of and in denial of the operation of colonialism, imperialism, so-called British Raj that kind of prevailed for 190 years in the subcontinent. The subcontinent now being divided into Bangladesh and India and Pakistan. And Biggs avoids answering straight questions because he knows that his whole persona is a fake persona. And the persona he has kind of crafted is based on his racist ignorance, racist denial, and racist kind of refusal to recognize as equal ordinary people in the Bara that have got backgrounds or ancestry or legacies coming from Asia or Africa. Especially in this context, it's mainly the Bangladeshis, because that is the one kind of independent kind of source. Independent in the sense that it's not the Bangladeshis in Tower Hamlets are not part of another kind of state. So the people in Tower Hamlets are mainly from areas in Bangladesh, the state of Bangladesh. Most of the people formally, officially, are citizens, British citizens, but the ancestry is Bangladeshi. And Biggs never kind of addresses the Bangladeshis as equal to the white people, equal to the ordinary people that he recognizes. So when he says that the money, the council's allocation of funds was going disproportionately in favor of the parts of the Bara, parts of the population that had more Bangladeshis, he obviously shows his ignorance by calling the Bangladeshis Bengalis. Now, this racist idiot doesn't understand that there is an entirely independent kind of part of India, the Republic of India called West Bengal. That is where the people, most of the Bengali people are resident in. And Bangladesh, the Bangladeshi people are not Bengalis, because there are Bengalis and there are Silotis, and the people in the UK, in Tower Hamlets and in the UK, are essentially overwhelmingly Siloti speakers. And Silot itself is an entity that predates both Bangladesh and India and the kind of British presence of 190 years by centuries. So Silot is an entity of its own, and because of subsequent strictly political kind of demarcations and reorganizations, Silot has become part of various kind of other kind of formations. So before 1947, Silot was part of the area called Assam. And even now today, 2020, kind of 73 years after the 47 events, the Siloti language is a significant language in Assam, which means that a large part of Silot is in the Indian province of Assam and neighboring kind of provinces of India that have been formed following the 1947 events, which marked the departure of the British Raj or Empire. That is the political departure, which means that the departure has not been actually implemented in other respects, on which we shall be talking in due course at length, but not this part. So John Biggs says idiocy and ignorance and contempt and racist prejudice is unacceptable in a democratic setting and supposedly democratically in existence, local kind of council. Because that combination of unfitness actually bars him from seeking any position to represent the borough. Ironically, because of the corruption and the intra-community criminality that has bedeviled the Bangladeshi community for most of the last 30 years, 40 years, the likes of John Biggs, not just him, but others who are equally racist and equally ignorant and equally corrupt as John Biggs, have taken advantage and have sought and been able to get positions in the elected framework. And as a result of that, or those kinds of racists getting into elected positions in Tower Hamlets and in the name of Tower Hamlets, the fact and the quality of the various services needed by the local community have been hampered and have been kind of denied. Add to that the pre-Lilliputian frame of mind that exhibits itself in the behavior and the attitude and the outlook of many of the members of the community in Tower Hamlets. I'm talking about the Bangladeshis. And by pre-Lilliputian, I literally mean pre-Lilliputian in the sense that the image of the Lilliputian population that is depicted in Gulliver's Travel in the book, the image of the Lilliputians, the image generally is an image of people that are really ignorant, at a very basic level, very ignorant and very stupid. Now, the people who are in Tower Hamlets and are directly from Tower Hamlets and directly from Silot, many of them, not every single one of them, or the majority of them, but a significant number of them come from the background that I'm familiar with. In that, when I took up the position voluntarily to help people kind of seek what was called at the time the employment voucher scheme, seek admission or entry into the UK under that scheme. I did that. I helped, as I said, any number of people, hundreds, close to several hundred. And that was a lot of people from one single area that I was based in. So when I helped them through all the kind of documentary processes, I did that. The motivation was entirely mine, based on observation of the severity of the poverty that most of the people in the area were in. So it was simply, for me, it was simply and primarily and absolutely a way to allow them, help them to escape this severe poverty. So they came straight from Silot and the villages to the UK. Now, socially, kind of organizationally, in terms of the various institutions, there could not be more different kind of backgrounds and the destination, if you like, original place, because in the villages there was absolutely no institution. And even now the villages are lacking in institutions in the kind of rigorous way of accountability and answerability and all the rest of it. And my role as a member of the population in the village was what it is now. I volunteer and I do the best I can to help advocate for the community and assist the people reach a better level of life and aspiration, whatever. So I know for a fact that the people that are in Tower Hamlets from that time, or people that are in Tower Hamlets from a slightly later time than when I helped them make use of the employment voucher, did not come to Tower Hamlets or settle in Tower Hamlets or to the UK for any other reason other than to find a place where the remuneration for their work would be higher than they would be getting in the villages or in the country. And that was the case. That has been proven to be the case. The people who came in the first and the only substantive wave of the employment voucher kind of generation were able to both get the higher level of remuneration for their work and also send enough remittance or remit enough money to their relations, their family back in the villages in Silot. To the extent that many of them bought, not only met their day-to-day expenses, but they also were able to buy land for cultivation, not land in the sense that is understood in the UK for property. That was not the land that they acquired. And they helped the other members of the families or relations if they didn't have any family immediately. So this was nothing to do with kind of coming across a racist denier moron like John Biggs, who has no idea about their background. So he says that he noticed that they have achieved a lot. They didn't achieve anything. It was nothing to do with the achievement that has been facilitated by this. This is the suggestion by the racist. It was completely different exchange rate and different kind of society, and it is nothing to do with the society doing any favors to these people. The factories that they came and kind of joined were paying them much lower wages than the factories would pay them if they recognize their full skill. So Charlie Marx's surplus value of labor was operating then, and it is still operating. But so it suggests the way that the racist, liar, and criminal denier, and briber and crook John Biggs has addressed the Bangladeshis suggests that to him, the Bangladeshis were being given a favor by the exploiters and the exploitative machine. The employment voucher was not issued as a favor. The employment voucher was a scheme issued by a sinking economy and labor force that didn't have enough cheap labor or any labor at all. Remember the case of the people from Jamaica and the Caribbean. That happened in the decade before. Immediately before the 1960s, it was the 1950s. And the Windrush people were similarly invited. So I may make the assertion that, like the Windrush people of the 1950s, the Siloti people came as a result of the employment voucher scheme, and they have been exploited and they have been kind of not recognized. And this is time to stop the exploitation and the denial and to recognize the people in terms of the contributions they made to the economy. I'm making this point. I have been referring to this, but not in the way that I'm just making it in this particular part 2 of the Khoodeelaar World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. Now, there is no mention, as I said in part 1 or part A today, there is no mention in Fleet Street papers and titles, either on the Sunday editions or the weekday edition, of the existence of the United Nations. And so therefore there is no mention likewise of the UK's obligations under the kind of various treaties, conventions, declarations, charters that the UK has been a signed up member of or on. And I have also said that both Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer have been in denial, are in denial. And I also said that all the Labour Party leaders have been in denial of these treaty obligations. Now, there is a bigger intellectual kind of explanation as to why they have been in denial, because the Labour Party, contrary to some assertions made by some of the Labour Party kind of post holders that it is a socialist party, it is not. It has not been a socialist party most of its life, most of its time in power. Of course, it has never been a socialist party. And there is a confusion about the role that the Labour Party politicians, some of them, played in the establishment of the NHS. The NHS was not a socialist kind of program. It was a kind of mixed ideology program. But essentially, it transcended the kind of boundaries and the restrictions imposed by the traditional communist or socialist kind of manifesto or agenda. And there is no provision in any known publicly accessible socialist or communist manifesto, not the state, but manifesto, that has anywhere near the necessary provisions and warranties and kind of demands and the needs and the requirements for accountability on a universal basis. The definition being universal. This is my definition. This is my analysis, my outlook. Because having kind of studied and encountered all the ideologies over a very long time, I have found that none of the ideological kind of divisions between what is called the socialist and the capitalist actually are substantial. And what actually matters in terms of division and in terms of distinction is what the character of the people is based on, founded on. And the only foundation for character fit for delivery in a just way of the kind of needs, at the point of needs, if you like, is the universal ground, which is the moral ground, the ethical ground, not capitalist or socialist, but moral, ethical. And the beauty of the moral and ethical is that it can be transcended across all the other boundaries or definitions or restrictions. For example, the divisions based on any two religions or whatever, all of those disappear if and when the universal criteria are accepted. So what is happening in Tower Hamlets with the imposition or foisting of the elected mayor thing is that the mayor thing is like a poisoned, is a package of poisonous kind of things in it. And Tower Hamlets, even before it was formed as a merged kind of entity, merged out of three smaller boroughs of Bethnal Green, Poplar, and Stepney. I mean, it was, I mean, each of those boroughs was corrupt already, except the time in 1921 when the Poplar councillors were in place. That is an exceptional moment. And as we have said, we'll come to that in due course because we are organizing the marking of the centenary of the Poplar councillors' battle. And we have been doing this for the last 3 years. We have been talking about it and we have been publishing and we've been posting, and we shall be doing it in a bigger extended way to mark the Poplar councillors' actual stand for their kind of constituents and their voters and their community. Accepting that moment, the rest of the time, the rest of the period of Tar Hamlets or of those three boroughs, and since 1965, Tar Hamlets has been a corrupt cesspit of corruption, criminality, and stupidity. And Biggs is a typical crook. And the fact that there is a substantial Bangladeshi community which began to form after the creation of Tar Hamlets in 1965, that fact is being abused by this liar, John Biggs, to get himself the white votes. Now, pause there and think about the poverty in which so many white people in Tar Hamlets struggle. Biggs has no answer for ending their poverty and their deprivation and their frustration. Those people are poor and in poverty as a direct result of the combination of denial of their rights and their needs and their say. Denial by the council, by the councillors, and by the likes of Biggs. And of course, historically, this goes back to the behavior and the denial of the MPs in post who are in post for decades. None of those MPs, and I mentioned 2 or 3 or 4, Peter Shore was a complete, utter racist liar. Mikado was a crafty little denier. He was not as brazenly racist as Peter Shore, but he was also prejudiced. And of course, Jim Piss, whatever, has been a brazen racist, hate-preaching liar. And the fact that George Galloway is a fan of Nigel Farage, I think sums it up about George Galloway. So none of these 4 white men who are MPs or have been MPs, I'll come to the women ones, none of these has actually made any traceable effort to represent what I represent, or even a fraction of what I represent or what I have been representing. In other words, the issues of deprivation, the issues of lack of accountability, the issues of prejudice and obstruction by the council, none of this has been voiced by any of the MPs. Notice what I'm saying here. I'm not talking about the councillors here. I'm talking about the MPs in relation to the council. And the reason I'm doing that is because the councillors, even though there was until October 2010, there was a leader kind of led council structure. And there was no dictatorial kind of exclusive dictatorial assertion of authority or claim to authority by a single person in the post of a mayor. Although there was this difference in structure, the essential role played by the councillors in Tar Hamlets was one of kind of complicity with the leadership and one of denial of the needs of the people in the borough. And that is what we are continuing to discuss. Let's check what is happening on a related technical kind of front. Let's see what is going on in terms of technology. So we started this one. This edition, we are just checking what time we started and how long we should be running this for. So it's 14:55 we started this one. And so it's just over 43 minutes. So we shall be continuing in this one. Now, the fact that there was no elected mayor in post or dictatorial single person as leader of the council for permanent kind of 4 years or 5 years in post until the kind of elected mayor thing was imposed in October 2010. Although there was no mayor in that kind of period from 1965 to April 65 to October 2010. The behavior of the vast majority of councillors in place was contemptibly, stupidly, unacceptably undemocratic, unaccountable, and kind of corrupt. So this may raise the question, how is scrapping the mayor going to improve things? That is a legitimate question, a reasonable question. And the answer is constant vigilance is the price of liberty. Constant vigilance is the price of democracy. The extent to which a mayor can say that they alone are the ones possessing the authority to make the decisions, whether the decisions are acceptable or not. Regardless of that, the extent to which that is the case makes it excusable, makes for an excuse by the councillors to say that, look, we haven't got any power, so we can't do anything. Now that excuse disappears. When there is no mayor, the single individual councillor cannot make that excuse. That's the difference. And the other difference is that the elected mayor thing is not kind of changeable. It's it's a stranglehold that Tony Blair has imposed and put around the communities. Once you've got an elected mayor, it's very difficult in terms of the system that exists around it to get rid of it. So when the current kind of word is that there is a kind of move afoot to get rid of the mayor, have a referendum in May 2021, is a very rare opportunity for the campaigners for democracy to use to the fullest possible extent. And we shall be, of course, campaigning for that to happen. But it is not enough for getting rid of the mayor. It is not enough to say that the mayor is dictatorial. It is very important to say also that the people in the electorate, the people in the wards, the people in the borough, how they have been lied to by the councillors. The councillors have said in the last 10 years, the councillors have said that we can't do anything, it's the mayor. Well, that is not true. Although they cannot change most of the decisions that a mayor has made, for example, there is nothing, absolutely nothing in the law or legally or constitutionally that stops councillors from publicly speaking out. Now look at Tower Hamlets. Well, the same case numerically is true in Newham. In fact, Newham is even worse in terms of the numbers of councillors that belong to the same party, the Labour Party. But in Tower Hamlets, even in Tower Hamlets, almost all the councillors are members of the Labour Party. what that means is that there is a kind of bureaucratic, dictatorial kind of machine in place, which is called the labor group. And by definition, the labor group is a private kind of event. It's not public to the public, members of the public. It's not accessible to members of the public unless members of the Labour Party kind of want to mobilize and attend it. Normally, it is only available, open to the council, because Labour group on the council. And the Labour group has got all kinds of whips and all kinds of requirements and kind of conditions for privacy, confidentiality. These are not necessarily subject to accountability and examination based on the universal values of accountability, transparency, and a kind of democratic answerability. So anyone who campaigns against the mayor system has also to campaign to remove the Labour group from the equation. That is to say, that instead of the Labour group being left to make the decisions, it should be members of the, at one stage, members of the Labour Party in the borough and the members of the public in the borough. And there has to be this kind of amendment. So we can create a demand, we can create a movement demanding for the insertion of this platform, and the recommendations of the platform must be made mandatory. That is to say, it has to be, the recommendation or recommendations have to be obliged by and obeyed by the regime, whether it's a mayor or whether it's a leader or whether it's a group based on kind of several committees. Whatever the structure of the council has to be answerable to and subject to the approval of the forum outside, forum of electors, let's say. And since Tony Blair was hoodwinked by Ken lying still Livingstone, who was absolutely determined to recreate the GLC or a platform for himself. For 15 years, Livingstone kind of spent all his time in trying to get the Labour Party to agree to the creation of a bureaucratic, corrupt kind of platform which would make Livingstone the King of London. Now, all the evidence now admitted by others, I mean, I knew the evidence and I'll come to that in a minute. All the evidence admitted by the public now about Livingstone being a corrupt, poisonous, hateful, self-serving individual shows that he's never been fit to hold a democratic position that actually allows him to speak in the name of all of London. Whether it was the GLC, the Greater London Council, or whether he was the mayor in the name of London, he was not fit person. Because the first notorious outburst that Livingstone made and gave all the kind of anti-Labour Party opponents and elements a pretext to base a campaign against the Labour Party alleging anti-Jewish bias was when Livingstone that is, attacked a reporter on the evening No Standard called Oliver Feingold. Oliver Feingold was asking Ken Livingstone a mere question. He wasn't doing anything other than asking a question about how Livingstone's particular meeting or whatever he had been kind of attending had gone. And instead of answering his question, Oliver Feingold's question, Livingstone called him a Jewish person, in fact. I mean, he treated him as a Jewish person, and he accused this Oliver Feingold of having or behaving like a kind of guard or something at the Nazis kind of concentration camp or something. It was 100 times worse than anything today's newspapers of Sunday, the 15th of November 2020, have reported as having been called by Cummings and his mates, who used various words, including the Mad Queen, Nata, about Carrie Simmons. Livingstone behaved 1,000 times worse than the alleged behavior of Carrie Simmons, let's say. And it was the one absolutely brazen, stupid, ignorant, corrupt behavior incident that Livingstone indulged in against Oliver Feingold began the movement against the Labour Party that was later to include many activist members of the Jewish population in this country. And that is not a kind of condemnation of this stupid Ken lying still Livingstone only. It's a condemnation of Jeremy Corbyn. It's a condemnation of everyone else who took the position that Livingstone was not being anti-Jewish. Livingstone was being anti-Jewish in a stupid way. He was being anti-Jewish, of course, because any comment that he made about the Nazi period was bound to affect Jewish people and their sensitivities. Without a doubt,